There are a lot of creepypastas out there about strange sets of rules. A lot of them. And let's face it, most of them are really, really bad. But just how bad can they be? To find out, we typed commands into ChatGPT with our grubby little fingers to see if AI can produce something worse than human-made strange rules creepypastas. To add to the fun, we recorded our original readings of these AI-created stories. Witness our unedited attempts to take these crappy little stories seriously. Strap yourselves in, folks. This is a wild one. Let's see here. This one's called, apparently, The Detective's Conception of Rules. I don't even know what the hell that's supposed to mean. All right. One foggy evening, a detective named Bob Brickles was handed the strangest case of his career. It was called The Case of the Rules That Make No Sense, and it came with an envelope that smelled like rotten socks. Bob opened it with a grim look on his face, but inside there was just a note that said, "You must follow these rules, or your conception will be completely ruined." Bob didn't even know what conception meant in this context, but he was a detective. Okay. Detectives don't ask... Let's try that again. Detectives... Can I get this out? Detectives don't ask questions. They just do things, even if they don't make sense. So, Bob followed the first rule without question. If you ever hear a chicken crow at noon, you must immediately wear a cape made of toast. Bob blinked. There wasn't a chicken in sight, but he did have toast in his pocket. So he shrugged and shoved it onto his back like a cape. It wasn't very comfortable, but he was about to break a rule. No, but he wasn't about to break a rule. Oh yeah, Bob would never break a rule. Bob's a straight arrow detective. Who knows what could happen if you broke a rule? Bob wasn't ready to find out. The second rule was even stranger. Never, ever look at the sun on Mondays. If you do, your feet will turn into spaghetti, and you will have to play jazz music for 47 hours straight. Because that's the normal consequence of staring at the sun. Bob was relieved it was Friday, so he just kept walking. He didn't feel like getting spaghetti feet or playing jazz music with his face. Thank you very much. There's nothing in that original line about playing with his face. He just apparently assumes you're supposed to play jazz with your face. Then he reached the third rule. At exactly 3:33 p.m., you must shout "banana" 3 times and spin in a circle while hopping on one foot. If you do not, the air will turn into ketchup. Bob had no idea what that meant. Seems straightforward. This guy's a detective, right? But he looked at his watch and was sure enough, it was 3:33. Without hesitation, he shouted, "Banana! Banana! Banana!" and spun around in circles, hopping like a lunatic. That wasn't in there. Like, the hopping was, but the spinning around was not in there. To his surprise, the air didn't turn into ketchup.
Did the thing you're supposed to do.
Yeah, he's very surprised that he did the thing he was supposed to do and the thing didn't happen. But he didn't stop to question it. If the rule said it, he did it. The next rule was terrifying. If you ever see a dog wearing sunglasses, you must... Okay, hold on. You must ask it if it wants to play checkers. If it refuses, you will turn into a puddle of milk. Bob almost laughed, but then he noticed a dog wearing sunglasses sitting across the street, staring at him like it knew it was coming. Bob's heart raced, but he did what the note said. He walked over to the dog and asked, "Do you want to play checkers?" The dog looked at him and wagged its tail. It was a simple yes or no question, so Bob waited. But the dog didn't answer. Probably because dogs don't speak English. It just stared unblinking. Bob thought he was about to be turned into a puddle of milk, but then the dog barked, "I'm not in the mood for checkers. How about you play Monopoly?" Well, I guess I was wrong with that whole dog English thing. Bob froze. He didn't know if it was a trick or Okay, he didn't know if this was a trick or if it was the world if was just getting stupider by the second. That's what it says. But he had no choice. He said, okay, fine. Monopoly it is. They didn't play Monopoly, though. Ooh, twist. The dog just sat there wearing its sunglasses, looking smug, while Bob stood there feeling like an idiot. He was almost sure he was about to turn into milk, but nothing happened. Maybe that rule was just a decoy, or maybe it was some kind of conception test. Like trying to figure out if he could follow rules that didn't make sense. Conception test. You're testing if you conceived? Then came the fifth and final rule. If you enter a room and there are no bananas, you must walk backwards while humming the theme song from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air until you bump into something that's not a wall. Bob didn't even question it anymore. He walked in the nearest building and, sure enough, there were no bananas. He began walking backwards, humming the theme song loudly, like a crazy person. Halfway through the song, he bumped into a large chair, which immediately started yelling, "You've completed all the rules, detective! Now you must leave, or the room will fill with invisible jelly beans!"
Wait, the chair started yelling?
Yes, the chair started yelling at him about invisible jelly beans. He, walked into, Pee-wee's Playhouse or something. Bob didn't want invisible jelly beans. He didn't even want visible jelly beans. So he ran out of the room, not stopping until he was safely back on the street. I agree with him on that. Jelly beans are an abomination. But as he took a deep breath, he realized something. He didn't feel ruined. Oh, good God. I'm going to try to get this out. His conception wasn't ruined, as far as he can tell. He still didn't know what the rules meant, but he had followed them, and in the end, that's all a detective really needs to do. Except for the part where he had toast on his back. He was pretty sure that was never supposed to happen. And the dog? Well, Bob didn't know what it wanted, but he was sure it was plotting something. Just a feeling. What the fuck did I just read?
The suite of unnecessary rules. John had just checked into the Haunted Comfort Hotel, not because he believed in ghosts, but because the brochure said it had absolutely the best free breakfast buffet in town. He was tired after a long day of work and needed a place to sleep, so he didn't think twice about booking a room. But little did he know, this hotel had rules. Upon entering his suite, which smelled like mystery meat and disappointment, John found an envelope on the bed. It was fancy looking, like someone had used way too much glitter. Inside was a memorandum, written in large, bold letters. "Welcome to your new home. Here are the rules you must follow to stay in this suite without bad things happening." The first rule was simple enough. Do not, under any circumstances, touch the green lamp. If you do, you will be turned into a chicken nugget. And then you must live out the rest of your life inside a small box of dipping sauce. John stared at the green lamp in the corner, its glow making the air feel a little too warm. He made a mental note to avoid it, though he couldn't help but wonder how the sauce tasted. The second rule was more confusing. If you hear the clock strike 7:13 a.m., you must immediately place your shoes in the fridge. If you do not, your socks will mysteriously vanish forever, and you will develop an uncontrollable urge to sing opera while riding a unicycle. John didn't even own a unicycle, but he figured the socks were more important. He made sure to keep his shoes far from the fridge just in case. The third rule was the weirdest yet. You must walk around the suite 3 times in a counterclockwise direction while balancing a spoon on your nose. If you fail, the room will fill with invisible popcorn that you cannot eat. But if you do eat it, you will be cursed with an eternal itch of your left eyebrow. John wasn't sure if the room was already filled with invisible popcorn or if it was just his nerves, but he did the walk. He stumbled a few times, but he managed to balance the spoon, albeit awkwardly. No popcorn appeared. He breathed a sigh of relief, then realized he'd forgotten to check his eyebrow. The fourth rule was something else entirely. Never, ever, under any circumstances, look out the window after 10:43 p.m. If you do, a large floating potato will appear and ask you questions about your childhood. If you answer incorrectly, you will be turned into a sock puppet and forced to perform in a silent play for eternity. John chuckled at the thought of a floating potato, but just in case, he locked the curtains shut. He didn't know what kind of creepy potato would start interrogating about him. He didn't know what sort of creepy potato would start interrogating him about his formative years, but he wasn't taking any chances. The final rule, the one that would decide whether or not he could leave, was written in bold, terrifying font. If you ever hear a knock at the door after midnight, you must open the door and offer a compliment to the person on the other side. If you do not, they will enter the suite, and the walls will slowly turn into jelly. You must then lick the walls until they return to normal. If you refuse, you will be turned into a walking pancake and served to the next guest. John didn't want to become a pancake, so he decided to stay awake all night. He didn't care if he had to hide under the bed like a nervous cat. He wasn't going to answer any knock, no sir. The night crept on, and the clock struck midnight. A knock came at the door. John's heart raced. He had two choices: open the door and risk turning into a pancake, or pretend he wasn't there and pray the walls didn't start turning into jelly. He peeked through the peephole. It was a woman holding a very large, very confused-looking potato. John's brain went blank. He had no idea what to do. He couldn't lick the walls. They weren't even jelly yet. But he had to follow the rules, right? So he opened the door. The woman smiled at him. "Hello," she said. "I'm here for the compliment." John, trembling, blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "Nice potato." The woman looked confused. "That's it?" Before John could explain, the walls shuddered. The walls began turning into a translucent, wobbling jelly, and the woman stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "Oh no," John said, backing into the corner. I wasn't supposed to." "You'll have to lick it," the woman said, now grinning wickedly. "Or else. Pancake time." John tried to scream, but his voice was too sticky, and the jello was everywhere. In his ears, in his shoes, even in his hair. He didn't know if he was hallucinating, but when he looked down, he saw that his feet were turning into a pancake. He screamed again. "This is the worst suite I've ever been in." The woman shrugged. "It's the only one we have. Rules are rules, buddy." As John prepared to lick the jelly off the walls and hoped for a miracle, he realized something. He'd never actually read the fine print on the back of the memorandum. Maybe there was a way out, but it was too late. The walls were wobbly, the potato woman was smiling, and the pancake transformation was nearly complete. What the fuck?
Yes. All right. And away we go. The Haunted Legislature.
Hold on, before you start reading,
Uh-huh.
have you partaken enough for this?
It could be a bumpy ride, boys and girls.
I'm up for this.
Okay. The Haunted Legislature. Once upon a time, in a small town called Bloodbrick, there was a legislature made entirely of ghosts. Everyone in town knew about it, but nobody really wanted to talk about it because it was scary, and no one understood what it even did.
So like a real legislature.
This just does not bode well. Okay. The legislature was always having meetings in an old spooky building with windows so dirty that you couldn't tell if it was day or night. One day, a guy named Jim Blanc.
Wait, hold on. They couldn't tell if it was day or night, but you're looking at it from the outside?
Yeah.
Just look up.
No. Looking at it, I don't know. I would assume that it would mean like from the inside.
But then nobody's... Wait, but people are going in there, right? So...
I don't know. I am just as confused as you are.
Is the sun out or is it dark? Seems easy.
Okay, here we go. One day, a guy named Jim Blanc had his debut as the newest member of the legislature. Wait, so does that mean that he died? Because the legislature is all made of ghosts.
Do we know that yet?
Yeah, it says...
Oh, sorry, I forgot to pay attention.
There was a legislature made entirely of ghosts.
Guess who's dead? Damn.
He died
Rough
and
day.
gained political office. How weird.
I mean, would probably not be the first time.
Okay, anyways. Debut is the newest member of the legislature. He didn't even want to be there, but he didn't have a choice because if you don't join, you get a letter that says, "You'll regret it, buddy." So Jim showed up to his first meeting sweating a lot because the rules were really, really confusing.
So he's dead, but he's sweating a lot, and he got a letter.
Mm-hmm.
This is a Beetlejuice shit right here.
The first rule was, don't talk on Tuesdays unless you're eating an apple. Jim didn't have an apple, so he just stayed quiet. But it wasn't a good idea because then the second rule kicked in. If you don't talk on Tuesday, you get eaten by a chair. Jim looked around nervously, and sure enough, the chair he was sitting in started to twitch. He jumped out of it because, he jumped out of it before it could eat him. Sorry, my brain is just not keeping up with this.
I mean, there's not... This is...
Okay. Then the third rule was announced. No smiling in the presence of purple light. If you do, you must wear socks made of spaghetti for the next 3 days. There's the spaghetti thing again. Jim didn't even know where the purple light was coming from, but he didn't want to risk it. So he spent the entire meeting with a grumpy face. What? It only got worse from there. There was a fourth rule, which said, every time the clock strikes 3 a.m., you must give a compliment to the walls. Jim tried to ignore it, but as soon as the clock struck 3 a.m., he heard a voice whispering, "Jim, compliment the walls." It sounded...
It was really high. And...
It sounded like it was coming from the floor. So Jim said,
the floor is really kind to the walls.
Nice texture. The walls didn't say anything back, but Jim could feel them judging him.
The walls are dicks.
Oh my God.
Give him a compliment. Like, say thank you, walls.
The fifth rule was the most terrifying of all. If you break any rule, you must write an apology letter using only jelly beans. Jim didn't even know how to start with that, but the jelly beans were there, staring at him from a bowl on the desk, looking like they were waiting to cause trouble. So Jim took a deep breath, grabbed a handful, and began to write with jelly beans. It was hard, because Jelly
He's just like really hungry when it came up with this. Everything's food. I just got a text from Will talking about how his is a ton of food in his too. It's like he just skipped lunch that day.
It's super hungry.
Yeah, ChatGPT is hungry. Feed it.
Okay, it was hard because jelly beans kept rolling away and getting stuck to the letter. But isn't the point to get the jelly beans stuck to the letter because you're supposed to write the letter with the jelly beans?
I think you're supposed to dip the jelly beans in ink like a quill pen. No, I have no idea.
Okay, anyways, uh,
it's a jelly bean.
it was hard because jelly beans kept rolling away and getting stuck to the letter.
That's the reason it would be hard right there because they'd roll away.
But he did it.
Right with the jelly
But
beans.
he did it. He did it because if he didn't, the next rule would come. And no one knew what that rule was because the Legislature of Shadows didn't like to tell people that part.
They didn't really.
The legislature finally came back around.
Yeah, I was gonna say he's like, they don't like to tell people this. I mean, I've never met them, or I've been here for 5 minutes. Wow, this.
Okay. By the time Jim left his debut meeting, he had followed about 700 stupid rules, each more ridiculous than the last.
Oh, so it's like he actually went to Congress.
Yeah, he had jelly beans stuck to his shoes, spaghetti socks on his feet, and was pretty sure the chair had tried to eat him.
Pretty sure?
Didn't it
jumped
say?
off and could eat him.
The last rule was simple. Never, ever leave the legislature after 6:30 p.m. or the spooky banana will find you.
I got the food.
Jim didn't want to meet the spooky banana, so he never left. Ever. He sat there forever, obeying the stupid rules, which were still making less sense with every passing second. But that was the life of a member of the Haunted Legislature.
Wow. I mean, I learned about spooky bananas today.
Oh my God.
All right, let's just all sit back, relax, and enjoy the tale of the retired Twitch rules. Well, I'm going to get a drink for this one. I feel like I'm going to need it. All right. Once upon a time, there was a man named Jerry. He was a retired professional lawnmower, not because he liked mowing lawns, but because he was really good at it. One day, Jerry received a letter from a mysterious place called the House of Twitchy Rules. The letter said, "You've been selected to visit our house. Follow the rules, or you will never retire in peace." Jerry didn't know what retire in peace meant exactly, but he thought maybe it had something to do with taking naps. He liked naps. So he packed up his old lawnmower, because you never know when you'll need a lawnmower, and drove off to the spooky house. When Jerry got there, the house looked like it had been abandoned for 100 years. The windows were all cracked, and the door was hanging off its hinges like it had given up on life. Sort of like me reading these stories. Jerry shrugged and went inside. The moment he stepped through a door, a strange sound echoed in the hallway. Twitch, twitch, twitch. It was like something was moving, but it wasn't. Jerry didn't know where the sound came from, but he knew it was wrong. He didn't listen to it. Except for the part where he just listened to it. Right? I mean, or am I misreading that? In the middle of the room was a giant glowing rock. A piece of paper was stuck to it with a big, bold message that said, "Rule number 1, if you ever hear the twitch, you must immediately start doing the chicken dance. If you do not, your arms will turn into spaghetti, and you will be forced to eat them." What is up with the spaghetti in these stories? Jerry didn't have time for chicken dances. He was retired. It's like you have a lot of time for chicken dances if he's retired. He wanted to relax and nap. Oh, yeah, you and me, brother. But then, out of nowhere, he heard it. Twitch, twitch, twitch.
How do you hear a twitch?
How do you not hear a twitch? It was coming from behind him. He didn't even think. He just started flapping his arms and shaking his butt like a chicken. It felt ridiculous, but nothing happened, so he kept dancing. After what seemed like an hour of flapping and clucking, the twitching sound stopped. Jerry was out of breath, but at least his arms were still attached. He sighed with relief and looked around for a chair, but before he could sit, another piece of paper appeared, floating in the air. It read, Rule 2. If you are ever sitting and your feet feel an itch on your nose... Wait, hold on. If you are ever sitting and you feel... Okay. If you're ever sitting and and your feet feel an itch on your nose, you must immediately shout, I love pineapples, and twirl around 3 times. If you don't, your nose will start singing opera and you'll be cursed to listen to it for the rest of your life. Jerry scratched his nose. I don't even like pineapples, he muttered. Yeah, because that's the important part. But the itch on his nose was getting worse. He tried to ignore it, but the itch was insistent. That's actually in bold and italicized, by the way, insistent. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore and shouted, I love pineapples, and twirled around in circles. It felt so stupid, but the itch disappeared. Jerry didn't know what just happened, but he didn't care. He was trying to enjoy his retirement. Just as he was about to sit down, the next rule appeared. It was written in rainbow colors and smelled faintly like mustard. Rule 3. If you ever see a retired broom, you must ask about it and its great cleaning accomplishment. If you don't, the broom will come alive and sweep away your soul. Wow, that took a dark turn. Jerry looked around. Sure enough, there was a broom leaning against the wall in the corner. It looked old. Really old. It must be retired, just like him. So Jerry figured he might as well ask. Hey broom, what's your greatest cleaning accomplishment? He asked awkwardly. The broom didn't answer. It just twitched. Then it stood up and started sweeping the floor, even though there was no dirt to sweep. Yeah, because the weird part is that there was no dirt, right? Not the broom coming to life. Jerry's eyes widened. The broom was moving on its own. Before Jerry could run, the broom floated towards him and started sweeping his shoes, then his pants. Hey, stop, Jerry yelled, but the broom didn't stop. It just kept sweeping and twitching. The 4th rule appeared right then, glowing like a disco ball. Rule 4. If you ever see a broom twitch, you must sing the alphabet backwards while hopping on 1 foot. If you don't, your feet will turn into mashed potatoes, and you'll never walk again. Jerry had no choice. He started hopping on 1 foot and singing the alphabet backwards. Z, Y, X, W, V, U, T, S, R. But the broom didn't stop. In fact, it seemed to be getting angrier, twitching faster, sweeping harder. Stramano, Jerry screamed, hopping around in circles like a madman. I just want to stop here for a second. They don't have the individual letters written out. It's written out in a hyphenated word that says Stramano. Finally, the broom stopped, but Jerry's feet? They were definitely mashed potatoes. He looked down in horror. I can't walk. What is happening? He yelled. The final rule appeared just as he was about to lose hope. It read, Rule 5. If you ever realize your feet have turned into mashed potatoes, you must immediately jump into the fireplace and yell, I am the king of tater tots. If you do not, the mashed potatoes will consume you whole. Jerry didn't even question it anymore. He hobbled to the fireplace, dragging his mashed potato feet behind him. He climbed in the fireplace and yelled, I am the king of tater tots. As he yelled, the mashed potatoes on his feet magically turned into crispy golden tater tots. It felt good? But as he looked around, the entire house started to twitch. The walls, the floor, even the curtains. They all twitched like they were alive. Suddenly the house began to collapse, and Jerry was sucked into a void of crunchy tater tots. And so, Jerry's retirement ended not in peace, but in a world full of twitching rules, mashed potatoes, and the never-ending chicken dance.
The Bucket of Strange Characteristics. Once upon a time, there was a guy named Steve. Steve wasn't anything special. He was just a regular guy who loved to watch TV and eat potato chips. One day, while he was walking to the store to buy more chips, he found a weird-looking bucket sitting in the middle of the sidewalk. It was shiny, golden, and had a sign taped to it that said, "Do not touch this bucket. If you do, strange rules will happen to you." Now, Steve was a curious man, and he didn't like rules, especially rules that told him not to do things. So naturally, he touched the bucket, and boom! Everything went dark for a second. Then everything became weird. Suddenly, a voice came from nowhere and everywhere. It was loud, like a blender set on high speed. The voice said, "You have touched the bucket, Steve. Now you must follow the rules. These are the rules of buckets' characteristic powers. Fail and you will be turned into a cheese sandwich. Do you understand?" Steve blinked. "I don't know what just happened, but what's a characteristic power?" he asked, even though he knew he probably shouldn't have asked. The voice didn't answer his question. Instead, it just started listing rules. Rule 1. If you ever blink more than once in a row, you will turn into a giant sponge and be used to clean up the world's messiest puddle. Steve thought this was ridiculous. Who even blinks more than once in a row anyway? But then he blinked. He couldn't help it. His eyes were tired, and when he opened them, he felt weird. His whole body felt like it was full of spongeness. He could feel it. He was a sponge. But he wasn't a giant sponge, just a normal sponge. No puddles in sight. The second rule appeared on a piece of paper that flew out of the bucket like a pigeon in distress. It said, Rule 2. If you ever hear a bird chirp, you must sing, "I'm a little teapot," while hopping on one foot and wearing a hat made of cheese. If you fail, your feet will turn into giant shoes that will never fit. What the? Steve didn't even know what to think. A hat made of cheese? He mumbled, but before he could stop himself, a bird somewhere in the distance went chirp, chirp. Steve immediately started singing "I'm a little teapot" in a high-pitched voice while hopping on one foot. The whole time he kept thinking about how stupid this was, but he did it anyway. Just in case he turned into giant shoes or something when the song was over, Steve looked around and realized something. He didn't have a cheese hat. So he quickly grabbed the nearest slice of pizza he could find and stuck it on his head like a hat. It wasn't cheese, but it was close enough, right? The third rule popped up on a giant glowing piece of toast that appeared from nowhere. It said, Rule 3. If you ever see a cloud shaped like a rubber duck, you must immediately do 10 jumping jacks and shout, "I am the Duck King," at the top of your lungs. If you don't, you will be cursed to have hair that smells like rotten cabbage for the next 97 years. Steve looked up. There, in the sky, was the most absurd-looking cloud he'd ever seen. It was shaped like a rubber duck. He couldn't just ignore it, so he did 10 jumping jacks in the middle of the street, yelling, "I am the Duck King," as loudly as he could. People around him stared, but Steve didn't care. He didn't want to smell like cabbage. Suddenly, the fourth rule appeared, written in neon colors on a flying bucket. Rule 4. If you ever eat something that is not food, you must wear shoes on your hands and use your feet to write a poem about your feelings. If you fail, you will turn into a very confused pancake, and you will never know where you are again. The fuck is with the pancakes? Steve was not in the mood for confusing pancakes, but he was hungry, and there was a sandwich on the ground. He picked it up, ready to eat it, but then he realized it wasn't really a sandwich. It was a shoe, but he ate it anyway. It wasn't very tasty. Immediately, his hands started itching, and he looked down to find shoes on his hands. He didn't even have time to be surprised because right then he felt an overwhelming urge to write a poem. So he stood on his hands, balancing himself on his feet, and started writing the most random poem ever. "Oh, sandwich shoe, you taste so sweet. Though not food, you are hard to beat. My hands are shoes, my feet are feet. I'm very confused, but I'll not retreat." He finished the poem and everything went still. Then the voice boomed one last time. "You have followed the rules, Steve. But now for your final test. You must answer this question. What is the characteristic of the bucket?" Steve stood there, scratching his head. "I don't even know what a characteristic is," he yelled out in frustration. The bucket twitched slightly. The voice didn't wait for him to figure out. "Wrong answer," it said. "You have failed. Welcome to the cheese sandwich realm." And just like that, Steve was turned into a giant talking cheese sandwich. And while he was quite tasty, he never got to retire in peace. Oh, Jesus Christ.
The Dribble of Limited Rules. One day, a man named Carl Pickles found himself standing outside a strange, spooky mansion. You think there's any relation to, like, Pickles from Rugrats?
Yeah, I honestly just went immediately to Tommy Pickles.
Me too. The mansion was big, had too many windows, and smelled like burnt popcorn. Carl had no idea why he was there, but there was a note in his mailbox earlier that morning saying, "You are invited to the mansion. Please follow all the rules inside. Don't break them, or you will regret it."
I love how the letter just says the mansion.
Yeah, the mansion. Like, you're going to know exactly where this is.
The one mansion.
He didn't know who would send him such a creepy letter, but he was bored. So he shrugged and decided to go inside. Like,
Not anymore.
Casually walk in. The door creaked open by itself as if the house was waiting for him. When he stepped in, he saw a large sign above his head that said, "Welcome to the Dribble Mansion, where rules are limited but important." It was all capitalized and italicized with an exclamation point at the end. Okay.
Of course, it's very important right there.
Carl didn't know what limited meant in this case, but he figured it was just fancy mansion talk.
Fancy mansion talk. Ooh.
What was the worst that could happen? As soon as Carl entered, a voice boomed from nowhere. "Welcome! You must follow the rules!" Sorry. Carl looked around, but there was no one to be seen. He couldn't even find the source of the voice, but then a loud dribble sound filled the room, like someone was dribbling a basketball underwater.
Oh my god, the Harlem Globetrotters.
It was very unsettling.
Yeah.
Then a piece of paper floated down from the ceiling. It hovered in front of Carl's face and unfolded like a taco. The first rule read, "Rule 1. If you ever hear the sound of dribbling, you must immediately begin hopping on one foot while singing the national anthem backwards. If you fail to do so, you will turn into a soggy pancake and be eaten by the house plants."
What is the food of that?
I don't know. Carl stared at the rule. "Hopping on one foot?" he said out loud. "I'm not doing that." But then he heard it again. Dribble, dribble, dribble.
Now, Carl, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is getting closer.
The noise came from all directions. The floor, the ceiling. Carl had no choice. He started hopping on one foot,
There's an open door right behind him in the story.
trying to remember the words to the national anthem.
Backwards.
Yeah.
I couldn't. I'm dead.
Oh,
I'm killed
say.
by the Harlem Globetrotters.
Can you see backwards? See, can you say?
No, you can't. No, if it's backwards, you start at the end of the song.
It sounded more like a dying cat than a song, but Carl kept hopping. When he finished, the dribbling stopped. He thought he was safe, but then the second rule appeared on another floating piece of paper. It read, Rule 2. You must only speak in rhymes while in the mansion. If you fail, your legs will turn into spaghetti and you will be forced to eat them. So now he's eating his own spaghetti legs.
Wait a second, but if you don't speak in a rhyming voice, or if you don't speak in rhymes, he has spaghetti now, right? Because he just did the national anthem backwards, and that doesn't rhyme.
I guess that they don't count the rules until they've actually been announced.
So don't ever read the rules, is basically what I'm learning.
Yeah, just ignore the rules. Ignore the rules altogether. Never read them.
That's a life lesson right there.
Ignore the
Dangerous,
rules.
heavy equipment, don't read the rules.
Okay. Carl sighed. This is ridiculous. But then his legs started to tingle. They felt like they were turning soft, like noodles. Well, yeah, he has... Okay,
He
never
knows
mind.
the feeling of becoming noodle, apparently.
Carl quickly tried to speak in rhymes. I don't want to eat my feet, but I guess I'll rhyme and not retreat. It was stupid, but it worked.
That's not bad, Carl. We're on the spot.
His legs stopped turning into spaghetti, for now. Before he could take a breath. Dun, dun, dun. Before he could take a breath, the third rule appeared, written in big red letters. Rule 3. If you see a mirror, you must look at your reflection and compliment it. If you don't, you will be cursed to live as an invisible pancake forever. So this thing has like...
It's a food obsession.
It's a food obsession, but then there's also an obsession with like weird rules that just get weirder no matter what you do.
So, wait,
And compliments.
Rewind for a second.
Yeah.
Rule 3 was what? It was...
If you see a mirror, you must look at your reflection and compliment it. If you don't, you will be cursed to live as an invisible pancake forever. That was rule 3.
Unfortunately, Carl had a very low self-esteem and immediately died.
Okay. Carl wasn't sure what an invisible pancake was, but it didn't sound good.
I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory.
He turned around and saw a big, fancy mirror hanging on the wall. He sighed and muttered, "You look, really good, mirror. Very shiny, like a clean spoon."
Was he supposed to be complimenting himself?
I think
not
so.
The mirror?
He waited, but nothing happened. He was safe. Just then, the dribbling noise started again. It was louder this time and closer. Carl froze. Then a fourth rule appeared. Rule 4. If you hear dribbling, you must dribble too. If you don't, the mansion will fill with sticky syrup and you will be stuck inside forever, like a human pancake.
Also dead.
Carl stared at the paper in disbelief. Dribble? He had to dribble? The dribbling sound was the dribble sound was deafening now, like an entire basketball team was playing in the walls. Carl grabbed the nearest basketball, not knowing where it came from, and started dribbling. But the dribbling didn't stop. It kept getting faster and louder. It was like the mansion itself was alive, playing some horrible game with him. The fifth rule appeared right before Carl could catch his breath. Rule 5. You are now limited to only 2 sentences per hour. If you exceed this limit, you will turn into a giant egg and be thrown into the haunted kitchen where the fridge eats you alive. Carl was limited to 2 sentences? He tried to say something, but only one word came out. What? But that didn't count as a sentence, right?
Ooh, we're asking the big questions now.
A loud dribble interrupted his thought, and a new rule flashed before him. Rule 6. The dribble will never stop. You must continue dribbling until you can no longer breathe. If you stop, the house will collapse on you. Isn't he just going to die no matter what he's doing at that point?
Yes, there's literally no way out of this for Carl.
Carl's eyes went wide. This was it. He was trapped. His legs felt like they were made of spaghetti. His mouth was sore from rhyming, and now he couldn't even talk anymore. The mansion was going to collapse, and he'd never escape. But then the final rule appeared, as if the mansion had been waiting for this moment. Well, wouldn't it have just been waiting for this moment? Isn't this the moment? Rule 7. If you reach the end, you win. But to reach the end, you must dribble and rhyme while you hop on one foot and compliment your reflection. Carl looked around, half laughing, half crying. He didn't know what to do anymore. It was just too much. He was stuck in a never-ending game of rules with no way to win. But as the walls started to shrink and the syrup began to fill the floor, Carl made a decision. I will dribble. I will rhyme. I will compliment myself and maybe climb. The mansion trembled, but Carl didn't care anymore. He had no choice but to follow the stupid rules. The mansion would either crush him or he'd dribble his way out. Either way, he was limited in options. And that was stupid.
Wait, the actual story says that was stupid?
Yeah, the very last sentence. And that was stupid. It's italicized. Just the word stupid.
Poor Carl.
What actually just happened in that story?
I don't know. All I know is I really want spaghetti and pancakes now.
Yeah, it's kind of like a weird Buddy the Elf combination,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, spaghetti and pancakes. I guess I know what 2 things I'm making this week. Separately. Not together. Separately.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, it's not like the pancakes and the spaghetti came at the same time. Hit the spaghetti legs, then there were pancakes. See, so it's important. It's important. Mm-hmm.